Welcome everybody, Hand History Reviews. Today we are four-handed in the 25k Triton Super High Roller Series held in Northern Cyprus. I believe we had a 651 member actually play this event. They did not make the final four. However, we're in a fairly familiar spot to many spin and go. It's in many spin and goes territory, let's say, where we are around 15 big blinds effective, a button versus big blind spot. I know how to deal with that. Mustafov has opened 10-8 off on the button, perhaps a tiny little bit wide, but you know what these MTT guys are like. And Patrik Antonius has defended Jack 2 of hearts, maybe some ICM considerations as well, although as we're four-handed, ICM starts becoming less of a factor. Let's take a flop.
I was thinking about it because it's not the best playability. Here we go. Deuce. But 2 overs, gut shot, aggression.
One would assume we're going to see a turn card, Randy. Mustafov with the gut shot on 2 overs, Antonius bottom pair.
7.
And backdoor hearts connecting with this 7-6 deuce flop.
So there's some interesting considerations on this flop. Obviously, on a 7-6-2 flop, this is, let's say, there are better flops for the button's range in terms of the c-betting frequency, and so you wouldn't want to have too high a c-betting frequency. There are some arguments about c-betting this hand where if you think your opponent, for example, one of the responses to a too high a c-bet strategy on this kind of board is actually just a lot of check shoving from the big blind. Now, if you think your opponent hasn't got that check shove in them, you're going to realize a lot more equity with this hand, because this is a hand that can obviously bet and call a non-all-in. However, it can't bet and call a shove. And so let's say, for example, Patrik Antonius sits here with Jack 7 and decides to jam. Betting your 10-8 is a disaster at this point. And so I do think that you could make a decision about checking this hand on the flop. Does seem to be a common occurrence of these hand history reviews that we see, that there seems to be quite a healthy level of just button C betting in spots where I personally would lean towards a check here. I think it's quite a nice hand to check. You've got lots of playability on turns, lots of ability to represent overcards that hit your range in terms of your perceived range. And then, of course, like the 10, 8, 9 are all fantastic cards for you, your hand and the realizability and the playability of your hand. However, Mustaf does decide to go ahead and fire here. You would assume Antonius is typically just going to call, has the backdoor hearts working for him, has bottom pair. Doesn't seem to be sensible to fold here, and so I expect a check call.
Antonius, with this stack size, probably will be calling.
3.6 million in the middle. We head to the turn. Queen of hearts rolling off over card to the flop. Essentially a card that Mustafov is going to continue barreling on. Little as you know, Antonius not going anywhere. So he's turned a flush draw.
So the Queen of Hearts comes. Obviously a good card for Antonius in terms of the ability to continue this hand in this spot. For Mustafov, it's an over that he can try and choose to represent, of course. One of the benefits, I think, about checking back the turn is he does a checking back the flop, I should say. It's a very, very credible card in his range. King, Queen, Queen, Jack, Ace, Queen, all parts of his button opening range, loads of Queen X suited, that you could just delay and barrel very, very effectively to target a similar sort of range. And of course, if you were probed into, you could continue and represent some hearts and clubs. And one of the nice things about having a 10 of hearts is on heart runouts. You could even potentially bluff that from the dealer button in position. For Patrik, he's obviously not going to donk this board. There wouldn't be too many there wouldn't be any, I would expect, turn donking strategies. I mean, we could manipulate ranges in such a way to create a turn donking strategy. If we gave the dealer button c-betting just air and gave Patrik Antonius a really strong range, you could probably make it so that he's got an equity advantage in donking. But realistically, there's going to be no donking this turn. And so it just comes down to whether Mustafov would like to represent this queen. I suspect he will, given that he went for a bit of a marginal flop c-bet. Not marginal in terms of marginal EV, it's obviously fine, but let's say he had the option to check and chose to bet. I think on this turn, he has the option to check or bet. I'm going to lean he bets.
A little bit tempting the multi-barrel.
1,400,000.
1.4 million. Antonius with a hand that can definitely check call again.
We haven't really talked too much about live reads, but there was a really interesting moment there where he just looked up. You see that little glance up? Now, he's either acting, in which case he's acting like he wants to. I would say, so firstly, what is the read I would put on that? I would put on that is some sort of working out in his brain, some sort of mathematics that is happening, some sort of calculations. Is he trying to think about his range, or what's he trying to calculate in this spot? The second question is he acting like he's trying to calculate? If you're Patrik Antonius and you're faced with a range that has a decision here, it's an interesting one. Would that, for example, be likely? Are you likely going to be trying to calculate things with pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces, ace queen, something like that? Or are you perhaps thinking about the SPR and what's the sort of sizing? It could be, not to say that it never is, but there are some combinations. I would be surprised if we saw that similar movement with queen 7 of clubs here, as an example. I'd be surprised if we saw it with pocket 7s, pocket 6s, pocket queens. I would suggest that weights him a little bit away from those super nuts where there is just less, you're just less likely to need to calculate these options, right? You've got 4.9 SPRs, 1.3 to 1 on the turn. You know you're going to get all the chips in on pretty much every river. This is maybe more of a decision where you have potentially the decision to bet 1 or 2 streets, right? If you've got a hand, as I said, pocket queens, pocket 6s, pocket 7s, they don't really need to calculate the pot because they know on the majority of runouts you're going for it all. So that's a very interesting little live read, and we haven't talked much about live reads there. Now, it could be balanced, of course. Maybe he does it with everything. I don't want to cast too many dispersions on Mustafov's play. He may say he's balanced. He may say, well, I'll do that with my entire range, and I'm not actually thinking about my hand, I'm just thinking about my range. But I think in reality, that little look up is a very interesting, just something to consider.
1 million for
1.4 million. Antonius with a hand that can definitely check call again.
Any merit to check jamming this turn and just...
So choose to go for 1.4 million. It is obviously reasonable as a, in isolation. Certainly no problems with this barrel in terms of, from a theory point of view, nothing too problematic about it. You will see having a club and heart are good for him, of course. Reducing the combinations of which Patrik Antonius can continue. You will see quite, I think often gut shots are typically slightly overbarreled compared to theory, at least from a lot of the population, in that actually they have some playability on rivers, and you take typically a bit more of no equity in a lot of these spots. Because again, Patrik has the option sometimes, if Mustafov is going to bet lots of equity on the turn, Patrik has the option once again to check jam, and again, Mustafov is very, very sad. Let's say, for example, Patrik Antonius was to jam something like a 5-4 of hearts or something, check jam, then it's a disaster with 10-8. Now, he's got slightly reduced combos of those because, of course, you have the 10 and the hearts and 8 of clubs. But it's just something to keep in mind. I think from Patrik's perspective, yeah, calling is pretty typical. There is arguments to check jam. I mean, similar to with the 5-4, like you just take it as a semi-bluff and you think, I think my opponent's going to be over-betting too many overs here, and I could just check jam and deny equity and deny bluff equity, and there's certain runouts I'm not comfortable with. However, I think Patrik obviously has different ideas, and I haven't seen the river yet, but we know a spoiler's coming. So if his plan is to call, that's also a very reasonable option.
Any merit to check jamming this turn and just...
Possible, but I don't think you'll get a better hand to fold.
For sure.
But you can definitely be charging hands that have equity like this 10-8.
Interesting as well, we talked about the mathematics of the little look up. And then there's another interesting action here, which is Mustafov is staring a hole into Antonius after previously not exhibiting that behavior. So this, to me, feels like quite a intense, stare down, aggressive behavior that I would typically, again, let's say it's an extra check mark in the box of, I'm not sure this behavior is exhibited if we have pocket 7s, pocket queens, pocket 6s, queen 7 of clubs, hands like that. I wonder if you would just naturally exhibit a bit more of a friendly sort of outlook, welcome your partner into the pot rather than, you sure you want to get involved here, mate? That seems to be the subconscious vibe I'm getting. It's all very technical, it's all very scientific here. Vibes, just vibes, no strategy, just vibes.
2 clubs.
Rather than playing the guessing game on a brick river where, you get to the river with bottom pair.
Yeah, a lot of merit. Generally speaking, you'd be check jamming a little bit more often if you can get better hands to fold. If you were...
Let's just push our equity now, if we get called, we have emergency outs. Curious to hear what the viewers at home think Patrik should do.
No, call.
You said call.
One of the things I will comment on that I think is really nice is the timing Antonius has taken here. So he's really taken a long time to make the call with what is essentially, you know, just a, let's not say easy call. He maybe has a decision in terms of check call or check jam. But apart from that, you're not folding this hand ever. And so I like that he's giving it a lot of thought in terms of, at least from a perceived range. I think what may have happened is Antonius may have made his mind up to call basically when the turn came. I check call the turn, but has now given it a real consideration, as though he's really pondering, you know, an action with a marginal, more marginal call. And one of the nice things about that is that it gives Mustafov the, let's say, assurance that if a heart comes, well, what kind of heart comes is my opponent really going to be tank calling the flop with, you know, super marginal here and turn, and maybe he's more likely to bluff off them. It's a little, let's say, a possibility, but something to consider.
6.4 million in the middle, just 3.5 behind. Ace of diamonds on the river.
So an ace of diamonds comes on the river. This is very interesting from a it's a similar big blind versus button facing a triple barrel. Let's wait and see if Mustafov actually does shove this river.
8 high. It's unlikely for Antonius to hit the ace. A lot of these hands of ace could rejam pre-flop hypothetically.
All in.
All in with 10-8
Wow,
high.
gangster.
And Antonius has got bottom pair.
So he does choose the jam. You can't blame the jam, of course, at all. Let's say it depends a little bit on how much air you have in your turn barreling range. How much air is also going to depend on how wide you're going on the button. Now, if you have 10-8, I'd suggest you probably then also have 10-9, Jack-9, Queen-9, hands like that, King-9. And you may actually be a bit more incentivized to choose some air combos with a heart, without a heart and a club, because when we're shoving 10 high or a bluff here, we'd like Patrik Antonius to have a hand like Jack 10 of hearts or King 8 of clubs or some unpaired hands which are never going to call. And when you have the 10 of hearts and the 8 of clubs, Patrik Antonius can't have 10-9 of hearts. Having said that, this in certain situations, and button versus big blind is a good one, despite having, let's say, bad blockers. Some of your areas, just all of your areas, sometimes just going for it. And this could be one of those. The ace is a good card for the button range. Again, though, it's good and bad will depend a lot on how Mustafov wants to construct his turn barreling range. We know perhaps Mustafov has opened button a little bit wide. We know perhaps he's c-bet flop a little bit wide. I don't know that for sure, incidentally. There's probably some ICM factors that we could consider here, but at least in terms of a chip EV perspective, 10-8 off is probably pretty borderline. And the c-bet, again, he could have chosen, like if we review this hand, let's say 2 different players, and Mustafov had a folded button, we're not all going shocked like, oh, terrible fold. We just go, okay, yeah, fine. And if he hadn't chosen to c-bet, we'd just also similarly be, okay, it looks fine. So he's taken the aggressive action at every street when presented it with, let's say, a hand that had the option to check at every earlier street. Now, Patrik Antonius obviously doesn't know that in terms of this exact hand, but let's say you're at the table and you saw him turn up with 10-8 in this spot, or let's say, you know, in an early hand, a similar situation developed, you may be somewhat incentivized to think, okay, this guy's definitely capable and definitely takes the aggressive line when presenting the opportunity.
Can he make the call? We're the sickest hand of this tournament.
The fact that Antonius hasn't like insta-mucked his hand, you know, the sickest thing, Randy, is as soon as Feridine moved all in, Antonius just kind of gave him the side eye, just like snap staring him down. I mean, look at this. The fact that he's even considering making the hero call here with bottom pair. The fact that Patrik Antonius has tanked for this long with just bottom pair and also blocking backdoor hearts, some of the natural bluffs that Feridine would have.
Once again, interesting behavioural posing happening from Mustafov. He wants to, let's say, that to me, again, we could be completely overreading this, and maybe there'll be footage from an earlier hand where he's behaved in exactly the same way. But the hand on the chin suggests a little bit of, I'm going to try and be comfortable here. But there still is that lots of eye contact, seemingly. So it's the kind of comfortable aggression, which once again, I don't know if you're making this face with pocket aces here, which is the one, you know, value combo that maybe would play in this way. Very interesting to think about.
Blocking all the more impressive, regardless of the outcome of the hand. Really just showcasing why he's here. at these Triton series, competing at such a high level on one of the biggest stages in the world.
I've seen Antonius make sick calls, but this would be absolutely madness if he can do it.
Would certainly be the highlight of the tournament thus far.
How many?
He can put on the cake. He wants to do it, doesn't he? Look at him. He is pained by this decision. His intuition tanking for this long with bottom pair.
What do you really have?
Trying to get a read out of Ferry. I guess one of the main concerns, Randy, is calling and Ferry bluffing with, like, I don't know, a 6x of hearts. After tanking for this long, Ferry coming with the 1/3 on the flop.
Good call.
1/3 on the turn, and he makes the call. Randy, are you kidding me?
So that was Patrik Antonius making the YouTube titled Greatest Hero Call in the History of High Stakes Poker. I think it's a decent call. I would say I think that's a little bit ambitious, that YouTube title. Greatest Hero Call in the History of High Stakes Poker. Not even the greatest hero call in the history of flash game spins. Huh? Anyway, well done, Patrik Antonius. Good call. Greatest? Not greatest. Good. I think there's a couple extra things I just want to quickly run over. And let me see if I can pull up a flopzilla, because I want to show you guys the impact of what happens when you widen that button range in terms of the expected bluffs you may take. So this is typically your button min raising range at 15, and we have Jack 2 of hearts, and we defend, and the board came 7 of hearts. There we go. 7 of hearts, 2 of clubs, 6 of clubs. Okay. So let's just run through. Let's pretend, imagine our opponents just betting range, right? Just as a sort of silly example, right? The queen hearts on the turn, and then the ace of diamonds. Okay, so in this case we have range, betting flop, turn, river, just as a sort of silly experiment, and we see the equity of Jack 2 against that hand, against range, against a kind of theoretical GTO button range, has about 31% equity, which is pretty close. It probably wouldn't be enough to make the call, especially when you consider that range isn't going to bet the turn. However, what we can do in this case is widen it. We see 10-8 open, right? So if 10-8 is opening, it's reasonable to expect 9-8 to open, I would say. Probably more reasonable to expect a few wider suited combos to open. So let's just make it a little bit wider here. Something along these lines. We don't know what the a6 is doing, but we'll leave the a6 there. And so all we'll do is that we'll add a couple more, maybe king 8, for example. Something along those lines. Now, what happens to our equity? 39%. So just in terms of it doesn't, obviously hands can get to the river in many different ways, but just in terms of like the pre-flop range that could get to the river, suddenly there's 8% more equity for our hand when we see 10-8 off. Now then, let's go sort of street by street, and let's start with a flop. And so flop, you definitely have a mixture. Will there be hands that definitely won't bet? I don't know, honestly. So let's just give a range flop bet to start with. The turn is where we can be a bit more precise. So would we see 8s to jacks bet in the turn? Almost certainly, I would say, is a possibility. I'm not saying definitely. We obviously see all the gut shots. Do we see ace king off? I personally would say no, but it's a possibility. So we can give him let's say we give him at 50%. Half the time we expect ace king off to barrel the turn. Okay, we'll do that. And now we have, this is the sort of turn range that we end up with. Now the ace of diamonds comes, and we obviously not donking, and then we expect top pair plus to always go for it. Do we expect kings to go for it? Well, let's say yes. And then obviously nothing, I'd expect, let's say everything that isn't king high to go for it. So we'll take the 10 highs and below, something along those lines. You can see then 49% equity we have. And now let's change, literally, let's keep the thresholds all the same, but all we're going to do is jump to a 15 BB more chippy V theoretically correct opening range. And you see how much our equity shifts. So pre-flop can have a massive impact by the river. The fact that we see 10 off here, that alone moves it from being a fold to a call in terms of normal spins. If you're playing a normal spin, I would not recommend making this call. If you're playing in a tournament where you know the guy maybe is opening a little bit wider on the button, and now you may not know that, then it could be cool. Now let's also explore just a couple of other ways we could have played this hand. So again, we'll go back to our kind of original pre-flop slightly wider range and just think what else could we have done. So let's say, for example, on the flop we've gone check check. Now the queen of hearts comes. I would assume Patrik at this point doesn't go ahead and bet his hand. Sorry, we'll go check check with our combo. So we're in our perceived. We're going to focus on our perceived range now. So we're probably perceived to bet our top pair plus. That's reasonable. We're probably perceived to check a bunch of air. That's reasonable. Flush draws we might bet, might check. Gut shots, etc. Overs. Overs is the important one. Now let's say the Queen of Hearts comes, and so suddenly our range looks like this. We actually have quite a lot of top pair. That's 35% of our range, which we don't know if it's betting the flop or not, at least in our perceived range, but it's all there. So we could choose to barrel here, and then we think, well, we'll take our top pair plus and barrel some of our 2 pair, Queen 7, Queen 6, and then mix it with some bluffs. And so bluffs are probably not going to be so much ace high. They may still maybe want to get showdown, but again, maybe this sort of jack high and below kind of range, something like that. And then we have the ace of diamonds, and then again we can figure, well, what should we do with various parts of our range at this point. And if on the turn you bet Queen X, I think it's probably a possibility that you could even bluff it on the river. And you have some options here. Now we still have some perhaps problems in over bluffing in this line, but I think actually, weird enough, it seems a bit more credible. I think you are weighted a little bit more away from the bottom of the range. You perhaps haven't got so much of this 10-9, 10-8 in the perceived range, because a lot of people may perceive you to bet those. So that's one other thing. Now here's the good thing. Let's say, for example, the turn is the 10 of diamonds. We've now got top pair, but think of all the gut shots our opponent has the opportunity to bluff. So 30% of his range is a 1-card gut shot, and 2% of his range is a 2-card gut shot. So there's 31% of the range there that is very, very easy for the out of position player, in this case, the big blind. So let's say we give him sorry, this is our range. I got that wrong. So in this case, on this turn, we look at the gut shots available for the big blind. 28% plus 9% of their range are gut shots. If we focus in on that and think, well, what kind of combos would that equate to? You can see there's a lot of 9x and 8x that are unpaired. A lot of even offsuit 5-3, 5-4, 4-8. And the great thing about this, all of these combos are going to be pretty happy to bet and barrel on a lot of blanks. So we're sitting there with 10-8, we get probed into, we have a very, very easy call. King of clubs comes, for example, and look how much of our big blinds now is air at this point, or weak pair. The weak pair we're beat anyway because we've got the 10. The 2 pair, top pair plus is a small part of the range. And in terms of nothing, you're going to have to give up theoretically a lot of this nothing. It's really hard to do, to not bet and barrel 9-5 suited, 8-5 suited, 5-4 off, jack 8 off, queen 8 off. It's like you have no showdown and you just give up the hand. And I think that would be a very interesting way to play the hand as a flop check rather than a flop bet. Anyway, that was a bit of extra. I don't know if that was very helpful, but as a little bit of extra flopzilla work for those who are interested. Thank you very much for listening. That was quite a long hand review, but I rambled away. So, greatest hero call in the history of the world. Or is it just a standard big blind versus button spot? Well, it's not standard, but good call anyway. Thank you, Patrik, Antonius. Thank you to Mustafov. And cheers. See you later.
Patrik Antonius, ladies and gentlemen.